morning, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome back to another episode of the Speak the Truth podcast. Chicago woman set on fire on train. It's not like we haven't seen something like this before happen over in North Carolina, where a woman ended up getting stabbed and murdered by an illegal and a career criminal. Well, over in Chicago, this guy apparently had 22 prior arrests since 2016. I saw that he had numerous violent felonies, and even prior to his release, they warned the judge, don't let him go. But they ended up doing it anyways, and now she's fighting for her life, fried to a little crisp. And don't get me started on the Chicago judge that ended up, the federal judge based out of Illinois. He got appointed by Obama that went off on Greg Bovino for, the ICE doing everything else, because she says that, Chicago is just not a violent city, and that's in its past, and it's moving forward on that, despite the fact that over 27 people were shot over the weekend over inside of Chicago, 3 people were killed, blah, 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 blah. Over in Portland, at the Portland ICE facility, they actually ended up arresting a man for, in what my opinion is, making terroristic threats to ICE agents, threatening to cut off their heads. And all of this is happening while we have U.S. senators that are going off and trying to claim that, you know what? We're just using our protected free speech to start an insurrection over inside of the United States of America. And that's not going so good for them either, because Pete Hegseth ended up doubling down. For those of you who are unaware of the situation, yesterday, the Department of War, under the direction of Pete Hegseth, ended up announcing that Senator Mark Kelly could be called back to active duty for the video that they ended up making, reminding U.S. service members that they could just defy illegal orders. You don't have to worry about it. Kelly actually learned about it on freaking Twitter, on X. He says he wasn't notified. That's where he ended up getting it. Tristan Allen says, didn't another person get set on fire in New York on a train? Jesus. Somebody got set on fire in New York? We're going to have a freaking problem, man. This is getting out of control. New York's got a lot of freaking problems as is. And with the I said it last night that the Muslim Brotherhood, Trump directed them to be designated a foreign terror organization. Well, it's actually going to be branches of the Muslim Brotherhood, and they got to go look into it. But Muslim Brotherhood, CARE, all of that crap, all kind of ends up getting balled into one. CARE ended up getting named. That's the Center for American Islamic Relations, or Council for American Islamic Relations. I forget which one it is, but they ended up getting named all the way back in the the Holy Land 5 case, where they were indicted, or not indicted, but named as co-conspirators for the people that were funneling money over to Hamas out of Texas. So it'll be interesting to see if they actually end up getting slapped with all of this crap, and if it ends up going down that way. But to get back to the story at hand, Hegseth and ended up coming back out again, and we'll get into this terrorism crap here in just a minute. But Hegseth ended up doubling down again. He said the despicable video urging Department of War troops to refuse illegal orders may seem harmless to civilians, but it carries a different weight inside the military. And I mean, I'm going to agree with him on this, because for the love of God, anybody, including a retired Navy captain, ought to know the implications of his actions and everything he's going to take. Everybody's always pointing, to Kelly's service record, saying, oh, well, he was an astronaut, and he was a war hero. He flew aircraft into combat. Great. He's got, I don't even care how many combat missions it is. I got more than him. I can promise you that. Nobody wants to, I don't give a crap about this guy. It's not about that. It's about the level of knowledge that he has in his head and what he ended up, doing. Here's what Hegseth ended up saying. This is a politically motivated influence op. It never named a specific illegal order. It created ambiguity rather than clarity. It used careful, scripted, legal sounding language. It subtly reframed military obedience around partisan distrust instead of establishing a legal process. In the military, vague rhetoric and ambiguity undermines trust, creates hesitation, and change of command. The military already has a clear procedure for handling unlawful orders. It does not need political actors injecting doubt into an already clear chain. As veterans of various sorts, the Sedacious Six knew exactly what they were doing, sowing doubt through a politically motivated influence operation. Now, everybody's pointing and saying that, hey, he's got a right to say you're allowed to refuse illegal orders. He's just quoting everything. But you know what he didn't quote when it goes down to what military members are supposed to do is that they are supposed to assume that the orders that are given to them are lawful and legal. Funny how he left that part out, that they should be assuming that those orders are lawful and legal. And on top of like him just bringing that up and pointing out that, you know, he is absolutely going after and engaging in this freaking basic seditious behavior, excuse me. You know, he also ended up calling him out over on X today. I think like honestly, Hegseth, you might be doing a bit too much, man, but I'm kind of there with you at the same time, wanting to go after this guy. He said, so Captain Kelly, not only did your sedation video intentionally undercut good order and discipline, but you can't even display your uniform correctly. Your medals are out of order and rows are reversed. When and if you are recalled to active duty, I'll start with a uniform inspection. That's what he ends up telling him and posting up a picture of his medal rack. And I personally think that would be effing hilarious if Kelly ends up getting called back to active duty and then Hegseth literally holds his feet to the fire and holds him in a uniform inspection. I'm not even sure the last time that freaking guy wore a uniform, but it would be rather wild to see an actual retired U.S. military service person actually get called back to active duty. I know we talked about this when we were talking about Anthony Aguilar and when he ended up getting arrested in the Capitol wearing his uniform and protesting and all that crap. Like, why the hell they haven't called him back to active duty and thrown his ass on court-martial yet is beyond me. But I digress. It would be interesting to see that happen and how like society would end up reacting, particularly because he is a United States senator. I mean, let's be honest here. And I'm going to be like, we look at the senators over inside of Nevada, they're not even holding it to him. They wrote him a freaking long letter. So the state senators over in Nevada wrote him a very long letter, basically condemning him and telling him that his behavior is not okay and they don't want to deal with it. And they urged him in this letter over on this page they said, we strongly urge you to publicly clarify your intent, retract your participation in this video, and reassure the American people that you do not support rhetoric that risks eroding discipline within our armed forces. At this moment in history, leaders who undermine the chain of command, whether intentionally or through reckless political messaging, must be held accountable for damage to the rhetoric inflicts on the readiness, discipline, and stability of the United States military. This concern is not held by one person alone. The current and former Arizona state lawmakers who have signed below stand firmly behind this message. And why Arizona? Well, because that's where he's from, right? So not everybody is out there screaming that, oh my God, this guy needs to be backed and he's a war hero and we need to take care of him. No, there's a ton of freaking lawmakers out there that absolutely read through the BS and know exactly what this guy did. Oh my goodness. It blows my mind that people are actually sticking out there and coming up for this guy. Now, there is a huge, how do I want to say this? Conspiracy theory that ended up getting put out by Fox News. And basically talking about how it was a CIA op to end up going and basically starting to like thwart the military. And if you look at some of the different things that have been done over time, yeah, I know I've talked to you guys about our local governments and insurrection and all this other stuff that I actually believe is likely afoot in the United States of America. But throwing that the CIA is behind it is a whole other deal. But that's what Fox News came out like actually accusing them of. Danny Golan says the Islamic Association for Palestine, the IAP, was the predecessor to CARE. IAP had a Hamas leadership and funded the IAP, so they needed a rebranding. Nailed it. Thank you very much for that, Danny Golan. Greatly appreciate you, sir. Yeah, I mean, ultimately, it's going to take 30 to 45 days for the United States government to come out and determine, because that's going to take place underneath what's his name, Secretary of State Marco Rubio. So they got to dig into all of them. They did name CARE in Egypt as one, not CARE in Egypt, but the Muslim Brotherhood out of Egypt is one of the chapters they're looking to, which would be the main one that everything should branch off of. So if they end up naming that Muslim Brotherhood like the main headquarters of it, which they should, because all of the money flows downhill from there. So if the money's coming from the top and it's flowing downhill to the other ones, well, yeah. Wouldn't you say that the top is feeding the freaking terrorists and you ought to label them just like we label the IRGC as freaking terrorist organizations? Anyways, but I want you guys to listen to Carl Higbee. I've got good amount of respect for Carl, and he brings up a very valid point inside this video about what's taking place here in the United States.
So let's talk right now. Do you believe President Trump has issued any illegal orders?
To my knowledge, I am not aware of things that are illegal.
Folks, don't doubt me on this one. I literally did this in other countries. But this is just the current lever being pulled. They've been prepping this for 10 years. They've been trying to cast Donald Trump as crazy, unconstitutional, whatever else, trying to create the vulnerability to crack his support, and none of it's true. Mm-hmm. Here from the manual, quote, a vulnerability is critical when its exploitation will significantly influence the threat's ability, the threat being Trump, ability to conduct support or operations.
Now, if you guys can't see what manual that is up sitting there in the back, that is FM 3-05.301. That is the U.S. Army Psychological Operations process, tactics, techniques, and procedures. Manual straight from Department of the frickin' Army, headquarters, Department of the Army. That is like the PSYOPs manual, psychological operations, basically how to manipulate populations and what they're doing. And a lot of that information for PSYOPs, and I'm going to have to unfortunately kind of start cutting some of the stuff off. Carl already made a statement, but a lot of that stuff ends up flowing directly out of the CIA's playbook. And we know there was somebody that's a former CIA officer that took part in those videos.
Operations in this case, meaning carefully convinced young service members that striking a drug boat in international waters might be an illegal order without saying it, because it's not. Oh, Carl, the military can't, and the CIA can't actually be using a PSYOPs campaign on the American people.
Yep.
You bet they can. You ever heard of the Smith-Mundt Act of 1948? This actually prohibited the U.S. government from disseminating government-funded propaganda or psychological operations materials on American citizens. Well, the Smith-Mundt Modernization Act of 2012, which was incorporated into the National Defense Authorization Act of 2013, signed by President then Barack Obama, changed that. Specifically, Section 1078. Got the receipts, folks. The primary goal was to remove limits to the United States government's ability to counter foreign propaganda. This basically showed the government the ability to influence U.S. public opinion.
And there you have it. So, yeah, it used to be that way for a little bit while. Austin Wilcox wants to know if we can talk about Venezuela. Yeah, I mean, why would I not? I actually ended up bringing up Venezuela last night and talked specifically about why this would be coming out on the brink of 30%. It used to be like a couple weeks ago, it was 20% of our deployable naval assets were down off the coast of Venezuela. And now it's upwards of 30% of our deployable naval assets are down off the coast of Venezuela. Ended up putting a no-fly zone in off the coast of Venezuela, and our military just got told yesterday, or it's rumored that the military that's down there on that mission got told that they're not going to be authorized leave over the holiday season. So they're not going home for Christmas. They're not going home for Thanksgiving. Everybody, all hands on deck, doesn't get to freaking go anywhere. And there's rumors, and not just rumors, but actual confirmation that B-52s were flying off the coast of Venezuela, very close proximity to it. And people are trying to state that we were bombing Venezuela. Nothing has actually come out about the United States bombing. I'm pretty sure we would hear about that if that had happened. But that's what makes this case of the senators coming out, of the congressman coming out, of the former CIA retired military coming out and stating that you can defy illegal orders. You do not follow illegal orders. You are mandated not to follow illegal orders. They're bringing all that up for a reason. And they ended up bringing it up at a very opportune time. As a matter of fact, I believe it was the exact same date in which that NOTAMs actually got put in effect off the coast of Venezuela, restricting aircraft or warning aircraft not to be flying through there, even at high altitudes. So in my opinion, yeah, they were likely referring to that. And I brought up other videos in the past showing that it has to do with like deployments over to Chicago of National Guard troops where they flat out just admit that they feel like that's illegal. Well, that's a problem, ladies and gentlemen. That is 100% subversion, right? You were trying to undermine the commander in chief. You were trying to undermine the leadership of the armed forces. And I haven't heard anybody in the armed forces other than a couple National Guardsmen come out that are whining and complaining, talking about how deploying to all these other cities might not necessarily be legal and encouraging them to stand up and defy these orders. But as people have rightfully pointed out, back when the military was mandated the spicy flu vaccine and people ended up saying, no, that's illegal, instead of senators standing up for them and their actual rights and what is an actual illegal order, now confirmed to be an actual legal order, instead of standing up for them and their rights back then, they willfully watched them get the frickin' boot and kicked out of the military and their lives ruined and their pensions ruined. All of those things happening because they refused an illegal order. And yet none of that is being brought up today. No. We're just pointing out the fact that, you can deny them, like instilling distrust within the United States military. And it's a freaking problem. And I'll tell you some other big problems that are floating around right now is misinformation. And I touched on misinformation yesterday. This article actually comes to you guys out of Reuters. This one right here, Trump admin orders review of Biden-era refugees, according to a memo. It's not just Biden-era refugees that they're actually concerned about. Now, I want you guys to look at the date on this. This is November 24th, so this actually ended up coming out yesterday. And what they're doing is they're looking at the about 233,000 refugees who entered the United States between January of 21 and February of 25. Specifically, they're looking at Afghan refugees, if we're going to be honest. All right. Those are the ones in particular who are vastly going to be affected by this. Now, why would they be concerned with Afghan refugees? There's people online that are actually losing their minds about this because the Afghans are not being permitted in the United States of America. I saw this video this morning and I thought maybe I'd give you guys the alternate perspective because my perspective on this is not what his perspective is.
Hi, all. Sean Van Diver, president of Afghan EVAC. I'm coming to you today from San Diego because the Trump administration on Friday released a memo that is bullshit. It says that they're going to re-interview all refugees that came in from January 2021 through February 2025. What they mean is they want to re-adjudicate all of the refugees that came in under Biden.
Yep.
Not just Afghans, not just people from countries on the travel ban
There's
list.
a time period for
every
that.
single refugee. They've placed an adjudicative hold on all green cards that refugees are trying to get. So if you're a refugee and you're trying to get a green card and you're wondering why it hasn't come through yet, it's because Donald Trump and Stephen Miller decided that they don't want to give green cards to refugees unless they take another look and they're good enough for them. Here's the truth. Refugees are already the most vetted population that come here. And the Afghans that came here as refugees, came through enduring welcome, our safest, most secure immigration program in our country's
Safest and most secure immigration program in our country's history. That's what he just stated. Well, ladies and gentlemen, last year I ended up doing a report on this and I ended up telling you guys about it, that we had Afghan nationals arrested inside of Oklahoma for conducting terrorist operations. And I see how people are shaking their head. Fake news, fake news, fake news. Yeah, you're absolutely correct. It is fake news trying to say that that is the most secure freaking program in our history, because if that was the case, we wouldn't have had two guys that ended up getting arrested. All right. And again, look at the date, Wednesday, November 19th. All right. 2 days later, the Trump admin ends up coming out with that memo. 2 days later, Wednesday that happens, Friday they put that out. Why? Because these two, in my opinion, these two men end up getting freaking sentenced. They ended up buying AKs, hundreds of rounds of ammunition, and planned on conducting a ISIS freaking terror attack on Election Day in the United States of America. When you were going to the voting polls, these Afghans that got let in the United States underneath Joe Biden planned on going over and blasting you at the freaking polls. That's what they wanted to do. They wanted to go up to the voting stations and just shoot everybody up. And they got busted doing it by the FBI. If it wasn't for the FBI actually catching these dudes, God only knows what would have happened. The amount of terror attacks in the United States are out of freaking control. Our bureau is like, the FBI is so freaking locked down on threats that they can't even get to like other threats. Like, we have so many in the United States. It's insane. They have a backlog that ends up going into this. Nonetheless, this actually ended up happening. And I want you to take a look at what's down there in the freaking video description. All right. We're talking Chicago, woman set on fire. Portland, threatening to cut off heads of ICE agents. All of that crap going on, where we have active terror plots taking place in the United States of America on Election Day of all things. And this guy is whining and complaining that we have to go back and revet because we let ISIS terrorists into the United States of America. That is unacceptable, to be whining and complaining about making sure the people that we let come into this country from hostile nations are actually friendly to the United States of America. Not everybody that was able to make it back into the USA out of Afghanistan worked side by side with U.S. troops. That's just not true. The vetting process that took place on that airfield was a freaking nightmare. Absolute nightmare. I've interviewed the soldiers that were screening the freaking paperwork to let people in. And no, and soldiers and Marines, sorry, jarheads, don't want to leave you guys out of it. And no, for a fact, they didn't receive the proper training on the paperwork. And the paperwork that they did bring and they did present, a lot of them were photocopies of somebody else's. And it wasn't until somebody from DOS ended up spotting that paperwork and going back over to the freaking gates, telling them that that was happening. God only knows how many actually got through and made it into the USA. I'll tell you the other part about it, and I know this from talking with friends, that when those Afghans got to the United States of America, it wasn't like there was a huge system set in place to make sure that they landed where they belonged. No, they threw them into the welfare system. And they let the welfare system place them in random places across the country. That's what actually happened. And it's true, whether you like it or not. And the implications of that are right here on your screen. That we could have had freaking God only knows how many people murdered in an ISIS terror plot. So yeah, the Trump administration going back and making sure that all of the refugees that Trump let in, excuse me, not Trump, that Biden let in, that were very poorly screened, that it should have never freaking happened in that manner because of piss poor planning over on that airfield. Absolutely 110%. They need to be double checked. They should be triple checked if we're being perfectly honest. Now, these guys, they're getting sentenced, right? Like they both pled guilty, if I remember correct. One of them got 15 years. Another guy's up for like a buttload of time. Both of them are basically going to have to give up their right to live in the United States. And as soon as their prison sentence is up, they get deported back over to Afghanistan. So they get to go rejoin the Taliban. I'm sure they're not going to get freaking, radicalized inside of prison even further and meet other like terrorist supporters and friends and stuff like that and continue to go on. I would love to know what life is like inside of a federal prison for somebody that wants to plot a freaking terror attack. Somebody says, look at Dearborn. I'll tell you where we're going to go before Dearborn, before we talk about the Portland incident, is we're going to go over here, over outside of McMinnville, Oregon, Yamhill County, over in Oregon. I'm going to show you guys this video that's floating around online. And when I say misinformation, psyops, all of that crap that's taking place in the United States. I mean, when we talk about U.S. citizens that have been arrested and detained by ICE and all of these people want to come out and talk about it being unlawful, I'm going to present this case to you guys because it's currently hot and it's freaking running and it's floating around right now. Nolan says, I believe the Afghan immigrants is one of the reasons why habitual line crosser retired from the army. Maybe reach out. I can do that. This is the case where they're claiming that ICE unlawfully detained / arrested a high school student. And it's spreading like wildfire across social media, and it's a complete and total lie. Andrea says, what are the odds anything actually happens to those who made the video saying to disobey orders? Pretty good, Andreas. Pretty good, to be honest with you. DOD is a different beast, right? People forget that. DOD is a completely and totally different beast. Ask anybody that's faced any sort of UCMJ action, whether or not they felt that that process was like due process and just. Pat Loudon says, I'm still wondering why our government isn't sending Taliban, is sending Taliban cash. Yeah, you and me both, bud. And that needs to stop. I got a feeling some certain people inside of our government have different reasons and methods and means behind it that they just don't want to tell us about. But the DOD is a different beast when you're talking about like actually prosecuting somebody. Like inside of the military, like, yeah, you get, let's say UCMJ action, all right, field grade UCMJ action, you get court-martialed, you get Article 15, NJP, non-judicial punishment, all that crap over inside, right? The first step is that you go before your commander and you get to determine whether or not you're going to just like basically plead guilty and accept whatever punishment he ends up throwing on you. You generally sit in there with your commander and a senior ranking NCO, and they witness you going over that, or you can deny the charges and request trial by court martial. It's a very real thing. But once you start talking about the DOD and you start talking about court martials and everything else that goes into it, man, it is freaking harsh. I want you to take a look at the case of, what's his dang name? Bo Bergdahl. So much information existed that not only did this man desert the United States Army inside of Afghanistan and caused the death, and thereby causing the death of numerous service members and changing lives forever because of his choices, but that he also sympathized with the enemy. There was intelligence that said that he was working and fighting side by side with the enemy. And in my opinion, there is at least one American dead that I am aware of that Bo is directly responsible for his death. And yet, underneath Obama, when he ended up going to court martial, he ended up getting off really freaking soft. You guys remember that? So that's Obama's DOD. We had so much intel and information on Bo Bergdahl being a raging pile of garbage that he very clearly not only deserted like his unit, but he also joined with enemy forces. We had a lot of intel that ended up bringing that forward. And then underneath Obama, he brought him home. Obviously famous, like, what was the statement that he served with honor and distinction? Is that what Hillary Clinton said? It's absolutely appalling. But when he finally faced court-martial and he got there, he got let off really freaking light. Got let off really light. Now I want you to take that and I want you to flip the script. I want you to look at the military today underneath Pete Hegseth and Donald Trump. It is complete opposite of what Bo Bergdahl got when he went to trial. And that was an administration that knew the man was guilty of desertion and ended up standing him up as serving with honor and distinction. Here we have a U.S. senator that did serve with honor and distinction throughout his military career. However, he is now a senator and a retired military person, and he is still bound to the UCMJ. And so when he undermines the chain of command, and takes part in seditious behavior, he gets called back in. And this is not Obama's freaking DOD. As a matter of fact, it's not even the DOD anymore. It's the Department of War. And it's under the direction of Pete Hegseth. And all of these officers that are sitting there particularly are not stupid. And I'll tell you something else. You know, the field grade that's going to be sitting as the judge on this, if they actually do an investigation and determine, and he ends up getting called back to active duty and faces court-martial, you got to remember that those field grade officers that are sitting there also understand that they are setting a precedent at the same time in this trial. I want you to think about this. Everybody immediately, once that video came out, did not sit there and go, of course, why would you have to make that? Why would you have to make that video? Why would you have to tell people not to abandon the ship, like hold the ship, or whatever the hell that line was that we went over last night? Why would you have to tell people that? Because they already know this. Nobody sat there and did that. Everybody that was out there ended up looking at that video and going, clearly, they're trying to undercut Trump. Clearly, that's what they're doing. They knew that. And there is something that's called the reasonable person standard, which is how would a reasonable person actually end up interpreting and seeing that video as well, right? So you look at how a reasonable person actually interpreted that. Nobody sat there and said, oh, yeah, of course. He was just there to tell the government and the troops, the 1.3 million freaking troops inside of active duty military, don't worry about it. You can deny. As a matter of fact, you're required to deny lawful orders or illegal orders. No, everybody took that for exactly what it was meant to be. Chris says, I did the OAW mission in Fort Bliss. DHS attempted to do background checks on those we took in. A few failed and walked off into the USA. Holy freaking cow. Wow. That's freaking insane, Chris. That's insane. How do you have people fail background checks and still let them into the U.S.? Is it because they claim to be refugees and that we're going to know where they were because we gave them a freaking phone and told them where to go? No, you don't get to pick and choose orders which you can and can't follow. And those judges, that judge, whatever judge, if this actually goes through and gets assigned to this case, is going to think about the implications of what's actually happening. Because if that's okay for a senator to do it, then every member of the military. Picture what happens inside of a unit. If you're in an infantry unit and you guys are about to go to war, and somebody just stands up in front of the platoon and goes, or stands up in front of the company and goes, remember everybody, you can disobey illegal orders. First sergeant comes out and gives a speech, says, get ready, we're getting ready to go to war. And then some freaking private goes up in the front afterwards and goes, hey, remember, you can disobey illegal orders. That's essentially what this judge is going to be looking at here, right? Like if this goes in front of them. And the judge is not going to stand for that crap. He's just not. Incog Faraday coming in and giving out 5 Speak the Truth memberships. Phantom Shaman says, I would like to see the Sedacious Six give us examples of illegal orders that they disobeyed and the ramifications of doing so. They can't do it. No, they gave, and Phantom Shaman, man, I put this out yesterday. I'm going to do it again because it absolutely matters. They did give an example of an illegal order. They absolutely did, as far as I'm concerned. They came flat out with it. And they tried stating that what the heck was it? I'm looking for it over here in my tabs from yesterday. See if I can pull it up for you guys. If not, I'll just go grab it and pull it back up. But they did. Here you go. I'll play the video for you. You want to see the example of one of the Sedacious Six claiming what the illegal order was. Here you go. It's a very short clip. I played it I think this is my third day in a row now playing this clip. This is Congressman Crow, Representative Crow out of Colorado. He is one of the Sedacious Six. He's a former Army paratrooper, Ranger qualified. Listen to him.
Don't you think that's a request? That's
I'm
a question?
asking specifically right now
number two,
what you're talking about.
Yeah, number two, he's also threatened to send the military into Chicago and other cities to, quote, go to war with those cities. Right? That is a very, very disturbing thing. Number three, don't you think that's a request? That's
I'm
a question?
asking specifically right now what you're talking about.
Yeah, number two, he's also threatened to send the military into Chicago and other cities to, quote, go to war with those cities. Right?
That's it. She's asking specifically what he's talking about. Sending the National Guard into Chicago because he said they got to go to war. And again, women being set on fire, multiple people shot, like dozens of people shot over the weekend, 3 people killed. Yeah. That's his example that he ended up giving. And he partook in that video. He is in my opinion, like a co-conspirator, if you will, that ends up going into this. So they did give examples of what it looks like. And in my opinion, they should all be tried. Every single freaking one of them. In which way? I don't know. But all of this is coming out because of crap like this, man. And I can't state it enough. You know, the reason these illegal order things, it's all on social media. I talked to you guys over the last like 2 to 3 days about how there is a huge, massive social media campaign. Yesterday morning, I actually think I just went over and told you guys specifically that you have a massive social media misinformation and disinformation campaign that's been recognized by the federal government. All right. They've laid it out very clearly. Russia, China, Iran are all trying to influence the United States of America. I even said that they did that in order to go after American politics and influence our elections, but they're doing it in several other ways as well in order to sow discourse inside of this country. I want you guys to take a look here. This comes from Nicholas Kristoff. ICE then did smash the window of the car driven by a 17-year-old high school senior on his lunch break at McMinnville High School in Oregon. The glass injured one student. ICE then detained the citizen high school student. Seems as if ICE should face consequences for assaults. This type of information is what's actually flowing out there on the internet, going after and causing this type of stuff. And it's not just people on social media posts. So it's also judges. And I'm going to explain that in just a sec.
Get out. I'm a U.S. citizen. I'm a U.S. citizen. Okay, you're a U.S. citizen.
It's amazing that they just play this little 5-second clip claiming ICE is out of control because they're detaining a U.S. citizen, acting like they just went over there out of nowhere and just decided to arrest this freaking high school kid on his lunch break as if that just fell out of the freaking sky. It's even going around in the news. ICE detains high school citizens by smashing his car window during lunch. And I've read through this entire article. Nowhere in here does it actually state why they ended up doing it. They just end up stating he's a U.S. citizen, his parents affirm it, and all of this other crap. And that's what's being blasted over across the media. So if I am inside of the military, I'm getting told that I got to go to Chicago and support ICE and all of this other crap. And I got to determine whether or not they are actually abiding by the Constitution and whether or not I want to support them in legal and or illegal orders. Well, I got to dig through a bunch of misinformation in order to figure out what's actually true. Luckily for you guys, I've done the homework for you. This 17-year-old used his vehicle to violently attack ICE and Border Patrol agents. Here's a timeline of the events, and this comes from DHS. On November 21st, U.S. Border Patrol agents in Yamhill County, Oregon, were being followed for several miles by a blue Chevy Tahoe. A second vehicle, a Ford F-150 truck, showed up on the scene and colluded with the Chevy Tahoe to barricade the agents, preventing their movement and obstructing them. So this high school senior, this American citizen on his lunch break, got a phone call, likely from his buddy, that said, hey, they're over here. Let's go impede their federal investigation. And they showed up with their vehicles and they freaking blocked them in. Border Patrol called for urgent assistance from ICE officers. When ICE officers arrived, the F-150 fled the area. U.S. Border Patrol and ICE officers approached the Tahoe, ordered the occupant out, and arrested the driver, identified as Hegseth Eduardo Soto Elias, a 20-year-old U.S. citizen, for impeding federal law enforcement officers. Shortly after, another team located the F-150 and arrested the driver, identified as 17-year-old U.S. citizen, also for impeding federal law enforcement officers. Both individuals were transferred to the ERO Portland office for further investigation and federal prosecution for impeding federal law enforcement officers. Patrick Loudon says, you see, the Chechen guy from your streams in Portland is facing some big charges for death threats to ICE. Came out yesterday. Oh, Pat, buddy, you showed up at the exact right moment in time with the exact right comment, because here in just a couple minutes, I'm actually going to be going over that. You know what? Hell with it, Pat. I love you so much. Let's talk about it now.
Social media content creator John Paul Cupp, who goes by Waleed Al-Amriki online, is facing a federal charge accused of threatening federal agents at the South Portland ICE facility. Court documents say Cupp, who calls himself the public relations director of the North American Resistance Committee, had been on law enforcement's radar for months after several online tips about his violent anti-Jewish posts, references to Islamic Jihad, and rhetoric about overthrowing the U.S. government. The FBI says Cupp began showing up to protests at the ICE facility in June, posting to social media that he would, quote, troll these ICE losers. A criminal complaint alleges that on October 14th, video captured Cupp threatening to kill officers and sexually assault their spouses, including the line, quote, I'm going to have your head on a stick and mail it to your wife. In November, investigators say Cupp repeated those threats in new social media posts. He allegedly made a TikTok urging followers to, quote, demasculate them, taunt them, and mock their authority. The U.S. Attorney's Office for Oregon said Monday that threats of violence against law enforcement and their families will not be tolerated.
Now, interesting enough about this guy, where did it go? I want to get his picture up on the screen. Interesting enough about this guy, I remember noticing before I went out there, and I said, that Chechen-looking dude, which is funny because that's what ended up getting thrown out in the comments, right? Like, who's this Chechen-looking guy that ended up showing up there? And this guy ended up going out there back in June, when Antifa first set up camp. And I'm going to be honest with you guys, if we go back to the Nick Sorter video, and I want to show this to you guys because I think it's important about some of the crap that's going on. I actually think this guy might get off on a case of insanity or not being mentally fit. Let me see if I can find this video for you. Because when I did that stream and Nick Sorter actually ended up getting assaulted, here you go. You guys will probably remember this. I want to show this to you guys. This is the guy right here. This is the one that they're talking about. This is the one that they're talking about.
All right, I want to walk through. I want to give a tour of the camp. So, all right, let's go. Ready? You have to go with me. We're going through the camp. Okay. Yep.
No.
Unfortunately, I'm going.
Don't fucking touch me.
Get out of the way.
Don't fucking touch me.
Get out of the way.
No.
This is a sidewalk. Get out of the way.
Don't fucking touch her.
Whoa. Okay, so this piece of shit is whoa. You're not making it. I need umbrella.
You're no longer allowed to walk down the sidewalk in Portland, or else you're gonna get jumped and pushed and shoved and assaulted here. And we're live, right? We got it. Okay. So now we're gonna get assaulted.
You guys see him right there staying behind Nick, right? That's the guy that just got freaking charged and arrested.
You're going to be pushed. You're going to be...
Now, I'm going to pause it on this portion of the video. And I'm doing it for a reason. A lot of people, when this ended up getting streamed, ended up stating that guy right over there behind Nick was trying to grab him or something. Both Nick and I concur on this, that guy actually tried protecting him from being assaulted. So I want to point that out because sometimes you got to give credit where credit's due. Now, something else that we ended up discussing on that, something else that we ended up discussing while we were out there was whether or not the guy was actually mentally stable. There is another mentally ill person that ends up roaming the streets over inside of Portland that the Antifa folks choose to exploit. He's the one that burns the American flags and does all of that. Well, we also have this gentleman, in my opinion. I don't think he's all there in the head. Personally, I don't. I've actually talked to him quite a bit. He's aware of who I am. He was aware of my background. He was aware of all of those things. Dude never made a terroristic threat to me. But when he's in the big crowd and things like that are going on, like here, he's protecting Nick. But then he also went over and allegedly, according to the criminal complaint on this guy, which is another freaking issue when we go into it. Hold on. Where'd it go? So I just showed you the Chechen guy. Hold on. Boo, boo, boo. I thought I had his criminal complaint pulled up. I guess not. In his criminal complaint, it actually ends up stating that, back in October, he had gone over and he had screamed at these ICE officers, threatened to cut off their heads, rape their wives, and do all sorts of freaking crap. And so then they dug in, and that's what he ended up getting arrested for. I personally don't think that this guy is no, he's not Chechen. He's American. The Chechen thing, it was a joke. It was a comment that I made during a video when we first started covering the Portland ICE stuff. And I looked at the guy and I was like, he kind of looks Chechen. Like, who the hell is this Chechen guy? Right? Like, that was that original comment that ended up coming out with it. But I don't think the guy is mentally stable, to be honest with you. Like, I think he's got mental issues, and there's a lot of things that could cause it. But at the end of the day, Antifa uses mentally unstable people. So I think what we're going to end up seeing is a lot of people who end up pushing this is like, look at the violent Antifa people over inside of Portland and all that other crap. But I do believe that the guy is just mentally unstable. And there is a lot, like I said, a lot of false narratives that end up taking place, a lot of things that end up getting pushed in order to push political agendas. So I want you guys to stay like on your heels, or on your toes, excuse me. I want you to stay on your toes and be able to like research anything that ends up coming out. This lady does a very good job depicting and breaking down a lot of the different false narratives that are actually coming out of Charlotte.
2 ICE raids that took place in Charlotte, North Carolina have went viral. The first one is of a 15-year-old boy working at a grocery store.
Why is it so quiet on her end, man? Dude, I have this literally bumped up 30 decibels, and I'm going to actually fix that for you guys. I'm going to actually bump it up again, because for some reason it's just not loud enough when this lady's talking. So hopefully this ends up taking care of it. I've got a limiter set on. Hopefully you guys are good.
That is what the media told you. But what the media is forgetting to tell you is that actually this kid was not 15 years old. He's 20 years old, an illegal immigrant. ICE agents went up to him in the grocery store, but the 20-year-old put up a fight, ran out of the grocery store, and ICE agents caught him in the parking lot of the grocery store and zip-tied his hands and took him away. But the media is making it out like it's this 15-year-old this nice boy working at the grocery store, but he's actually 20 years old and he's an illegal immigrant. So yeah, ICE did get him. Another one that went viral is a picture of a man working at a restaurant. It shows 2 ICE agents holding this man down. What the media is forgetting to tell you is that the man that they're holding down actually has a knife in his hand. Also, the same individual has been charged with serious crimes that he committed against a child. He's already committed a serious crime.
Is that really Nick Shirley's mom? I had no idea. Are you guys joking in the comments? Or is that really Nick Shirley's mom?
Crime here in America. ICE agents go to get him at this restaurant. He has a knife in his hand and he's putting up a fight. But the media once again is making it out the ICE agents are just arresting this nice guy as he's working at the restaurant. The media is forgetting to tell you the truth behind these ICE raids. ICE agents actually do their job, and they're going after the worst of the worst.
It's a real thing. Information, misinformation, all of that crap is being put out. I had no idea. Look at you guys. I had no idea that's what's actually coming out. This post actually went retarded yesterday. 108,000 views. This guy, David Beer, says, new data I've received, just 5% of people detained by ICE since October since October 1 have had violent criminal convictions. I ended up posting about this and saying, oh my God, I can't believe it. ICE is actually doing their job deporting illegals. Nick Sorter ended up jumping in the comment section of my post and stating, dude, it says booked into ICE had violent criminal convictions this fiscal year. So they're saying from October 1 of 26 to present day, only 5% have done any illegal activity this fiscal year. So it's skewed data that goes into it. And he pointed it out so freaking well. No conviction, 73%. I'm sorry that 73% of the people haven't been convicted of being criminals since November 1st, but a lot of them have been convicted of being criminals and end up getting freaking thrown out. Such as, just like we were discussing, the incident that has like taken place over inside of Chicago, where you have a actual career criminal, right, who went after. He's had 72 arrests. That gentleman down there has had 72 arrests in his past. And he set that woman on fire on a freaking train. Set her on fire on a train. And it doesn't go anywhere. Like nothing ends up coming out of it. And people actually warned the judge not to not to basically let him out because of that. Oh, come on, play the video.
In national headlines tonight, a man is charged with terrorism in Chicago after allegedly setting a woman on fire on a train yesterday. According to prosecutors, 50-year-old Lawrence Reed poured gasoline on a 26-year-old woman, and she tried to run away before he allegedly set her on fire. The woman was rushed to the hospital in critical condition. Reed could receive a life sentence if convicted. In national headlines,
yeah, you know what else he did? He ended up stopping and purchasing gasoline right before it happened. The guy stopped and picked up gasoline and intentionally went out and doing it. And I see 72 by Linda Liu stating that. I've seen people state that he's had 72 as well. It's disgusting what our legal system and our justice system is doing for this crap. So yeah, we've got the guy in Portland that gets arrested on those convictions, and then we have all of that basically threatening to cut off heads of ICE agents, rape their wives and things like that. You got a guy over in Chicago that's running around and doing all of those bad things. But when we go over and we take a look at what the hell is actually happening in Chicago, it brings some questions to mind. You guys remember last month when Greg Bavino, the commander at large for CBP, the CBP guy that's famous for like going around and flicking crap at protesters and everything else, ended up this guy right here. Here we go. Him. You guys remember him, right? He ended up getting ordered by a federal judge, a district judge, to show up and report all of their different uses of force because a federal judge saw probable cause or reason to believe that ICE/CBP agents that were operating inside of Chicago were using excessive force. So she ordered him on a daily basis. I think it lasted like 1, maybe 2 days max. All right. And then she ended up issuing her ruling that they had, in fact, ended up using, excessive force and unreasonable force. And then it ends up getting appealed. And now it's sitting in like an appeals court because I'm about to show you. Andrea says allegedly set her on fire. It's on freaking video, right? Well, they got to say allegedly because he's not convicted yet. I mean, that's just bottom line. That's what they got to use the term allegedly because words have meaning in the United States, man. So now we talk about this case in Chicago and everything that's going down. And you want to know why crime is so bad over inside Chicago? Well, I did some digging into this freaking lady. And I don't even bother with that bit of misinformation. But here, I want to show you guys this release. November 24th, Border Patrol Chief Greg Bavino, federal agents repeatedly lied about what they did during aggressive immigration raids, according to the judge. Now, I went over and I took a look, and this court order, by the way, that this judge ends up putting out ended up getting filed. This one that's been appealed ends up getting filed on the freaking 20th of the month. All right. So 11/20/2025 ends up getting appealed. And this judge, she is out of her damn mind. I'm going to tell you that right now. She should have recused herself from this case. And before, you know what? I want to show this to you guys. Before I even go into talking about it, I want to show you guys what I ended up finding on her. When she ended up getting confirmed by the Senate, they sent her, and this is that judge that we're talking about. They sent her like a questionnaire to fill things out. And this is her answer to that, right? Because she's a district judge appointed by Obama. The Senate's got to confirm all of that other crap. But old judge. She was a defense attorney for the longest time and said, what assurances can you provide that will assuage any concerns that you will have a bias towards criminal defendants, especially in cases that involve the federal defender program? Great. What she says is, I would recuse myself, and you guys can see it down at the bottom. I highlighted it. I would recuse myself in any case in which my impartiality could be reasonably questioned. Well, let's take a look at her impartiality. This is before she even gives her ruling. And she ends up starting this sucker off, all right, in this freaking court order. She ends up starting this sucker off by stating, before recounting the facts, the court briefly notes what this case is not about. And then she goes on. She said, this case likewise does not turn on whether the court agrees with the federal government's immigration enforcement efforts in Chicago or whether the court believes that Chicago should be a sanctuary city. Nor does this case turn on whether the administration has failed to follow its stated priorities in pursuing the worst of the worst criminals and instead has chosen to go after landscapers, construction workers at Home Depot or Menards, parking lots, daycare teachers, and parents walking quietly down streets on their way to run errands or the like. Now, I want to remind you, this is about DHS agents inside of Chicago using excessive force, which is inside her jurisdiction. She ends up quoting and citing a freaking a Stuart Anderson report from Forbes that says Stephen Miller's order likely sparked immigration arrests and protests. So she just openly throws this out there and basically blames violence on freaking CBP, blames violence on ICE, and blames violence on Stephen Miller by strictly quoting this damn article. She ends up putting it up there in quotes. She pulls an excerpt from the article and puts it in quotes. These arrests of people at nail salons, restaurant, construction sites, and Home Depot illustrate the targeting dangerous criminals is not the Trump administration's immigration policy. The likely triggering action for the arrests and protests in Los Angeles remains Stephen Miller directing ICE officials to arrest as many people without criminal convictions as possible. Bull freaking crap. You mean to tell me that this lady doesn't have a bias? This is about Los Angeles. This is outside of her jurisdiction, completely and totally outside. I don't even know how this would fit into CBP agents over inside of, Chicago doing their freaking job and going after people. But that's what she ends up bringing out there and throwing out. And God forbid CBP and ICE actually go after illegal aliens living here in the United States, because after all, isn't that their job? Yes, it is their job to go after them. So why would she include that inside of her stupid report? Inside of her freaking ruling. Now, she even opens this up in an even more egregious manner. Ladies and gentlemen, I'm telling you, this didn't get appealed because maybe she found facts wrong, which she did, by the way, and I know that to be true. And that news article that was up there quoting, stating, and I can bring it up here in a little bit, incident where Bavino ended up throwing tear gas because he was having rocks thrown at him. And then she states basically that he lied to the court because he forgot whether or not he got hit in the head with a rock before or after the incident, almost like rocks being thrown at your head end up causing concussion-like symptoms and might jar your memory a little bit. But there's video evidence that absolutely shows that rocks were being thrown prior to, and this comes from the protesters, prior to the deployment of tear gas on that date. But I digress. Let's get back into her opening statements of the opinion and order of the court. She clearly lays out inside of this thing so ridiculous, like she's writing some freaking I don't know, fantasy novel about Chicago. While living in the Ravenswood neighborhood, Carl Sandburg wrote a love letter to his city, Chicago. In the poem Chicago, Sandburg noted both the complexity and beauty of the city, known for its vitality, pride, strength, courage, tenacity, and joy. This case ultimately turns on whether the Chicagoland area, and Chicago specifically, is the city of big shoulders or Chipocalypse Now. Now, I want you to remember that just a little bit ago, literally, in her own statements, she uses the term, nor does this case turn on whether the administration has failed to follow its stated priorities or pursuing the worst of the worst criminals. Instead, has chosen to go after landscapers, blah, 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 blah. That's what she says in that one. But in her opening statement, she says, this case ultimately turns on whether Chicagoland area, and Chicago specifically, is the city of big shoulders or Chipocalypse Now. No, this case does not depend on whether or not Chicago is a violent freaking city. It depends on each interaction that the CBP agents had with civilians and whether or not their uses of force were actually justified. That's what it determines. That's what the case should turn on, not whether or not Chicago is a shithole and violent. She goes on further. The Chicagoland this court sees from Aurora to Cicero, from Chicago to Waukegan, and all points in between, is a vibrant place brimming with life and hope, constantly rebuilding itself to create a more just society, striving to move forward from its complicated history of segregation, police brutality, and gun violence. So now she says that Chicago's history, like is in the past, is gun violence. And expressly the joy of community and block parties, street festivals, and Sunday jazz shows on the lawn of a high school. Neighbors from every community show up for each other, whether by filling the little free libraries and parkways, offering free meals to those facing cuts in food benefits, guarding intersections to help trick-or-treaters safely cross the street, standing on the sidewalk to document law enforcement activities and protest against immigration enforcement activities they believe unjust, or simply praying the rosary to provide comfort and bear witness to those detained at the Broadview detention facility. Now, I don't know if she actually watched, like we did, and I took and I showed on this show, the religious gathering that took place out of the Broadview ICE facility, where you literally had a man with a white collar in the face and yelling at ICE officials to the point, or excuse me, they weren't even ICE officials. They were like state and local law enforcement. In the face, screaming at them to the point where people were holding him back. And eventually the guy ends up getting arrested anyways. So this judge lays out plainly that she thinks this case is dependent on whether or not Chicago's violent. Well, maybe she missed the 3 people that got killed over last weekend in gun violence deaths that she says are in the freaking past, or the dozens of people that were wounded in shootings over the weekend inside Chicago. I think it was 26, 27 people wounded in gun violence in Chicago. Or the woman that was set on fire on a train pretending like violence doesn't occur inside of Chicago. So in her mind beforehand, this case, and she states it right up front, is whether or not Chicago is a violent city. And the evidence most certainly suggests that it's a violent city. And again, it's her mind. She goes on. In contrast, defendants would have people believe instead that Chicagoland area is in a vice hold of violence. No shit. I just went over the stats from a weekend. Ransacked by rioters and attacked by agitators, which justifies the unprecedented swath of indiscriminate uses of force unleashed on journalists, peaceful protesters, and religious practitioners. Unjustified use of force. Those religious practitioners that I showed you on video who were clearly standing outside of the allotted area for them to stand there in protest, that were getting in the face and screaming at local law enforcement entities, trying to stop freaking vehicles from coming and going. Literally, at one point, they had the entire gate blocked off. And this woman is sitting in freaking La La Land, pretending like Chicagoland area is not a vice hold of violence. She says this narrative is simply untrue. And as noted in multiple instances throughout this opinion, defendant's own evidence in this case belies that assertion. Bullshit. You guys, for the love of God, I know I'm not the only one that's seen this. I know I'm not the only one that's seen these freaking videos. This is a freaking district judge. This is a federal judge lying on a freaking document trying to say that gun violence is a thing of the past inside of Chicago, while our city's got numerous, like dozens of people wounded, shot, killed over the weekend. People set on freaking fire. Narrative is simply untrue, according to her. God forbid that actually takes place and goes down. Now, I'll remind you that she said, in her own words, I would recuse myself in any case in which my impartiality could be reasonably questioned. What reasonable person wouldn't question that? And I'm going to just start a poll. Should she recuse herself? Oh, well, it's too late for that. Have recused herself. I'm just curious. I'm going to send this poll up. I want to know, out of the 1,400 of you guys hanging out with me this morning, whether or not that judge should have recused herself. Because in my opinion, absolutely 1,000%, this woman should have recused herself. She shouldn't be sitting there. This report gets more and more ridiculous the further down I go into this. She actually brings up at one point in time the incident where Bavino deploys tear gas. and ends up like going off because he can't recall properly the order in which things happen, and accuse him of lying to the court, which is why we have this article out here. Federal agents repeatedly lied about what they did during aggressive immigration raids, according to the judge. Well, let's take a look at that judge. Let's look at what that judge said. Let's look at what that judge's opinion is on everything. Clearly, that judge is out of line. Clearly. Did my stream just get canceled? Because I watched my concurrent viewers go from 1,400 and take a direct spike down to 256 the moment I started calling this freaking judge out. Holy freaking cow. And it's got excellent health. Wow, dude. Holy freaking cow, YouTube. Holy freaking cow. Can't believe it. Her city. Her city. Right there. She should have recused herself. She should have been freaking removed from the stand. 1,400 of you guys hanging out after I just went over what she actually had stated about it. 156 votes in so far. 98% of the people in here agree this judge is biased. She has problems inside of her brain, and she should have recused herself and freaking backed off. It's freaking sad. And to take this all the way back, I want you guys to remember, when we start talking about this freaking senator that ended up coming up and an insurrection taking place over here, so it still says, okay, good, you guys are there. The senator ends up coming out and saying defy illegal orders, ignore illegal orders, the seditious six, defy illegal orders. And we have federal judges that are just blatantly lying on documents that gun violence is a thing of Chicago's past. It's history, according to the judge, and slamming federal agents. And then we have media sources that are lying to you. We have all of this stuff going on, and yet nobody here seems to think that there is a problem in the United States of America. It is a flat out lie. It is wrong, ladies and gentlemen, and I highly suggest you guys start bringing something up about it because it is unacceptable as far as I'm concerned. Now, if you're not going to take it from me that there's a big problem that we need to focus on counterintelligence here in the United States of America, counter misinformation, counter disinformation, I want to bring up to you guys this former CIA officer that got interviewed by Laura Logan.
And so I would ask President Trump as early as possible, convene a commission and create a new intelligence organization. Sam Faddis was a very capable former CIA officer, wrote a book called Beyond Repair over a decade ago. I would use that book as the model, but you must create a counterintelligence service like Britain's MI5. And to do that, you have to save the country. The problem for President Trump is he comes in and there's so many problems. There were so many things he had to deal with. He had to deal with the economy. He had to deal with hundreds of thousands of people that were put in here, illegally. They'll close the border. He had to deal with all sorts of illegal investigations against him. I'm not angry at the president for not getting to this yet, but he has to get to it now. Yeah. He has to get to the intelligence threats to this country now.
If he doesn't get to elections before the midterms,
He's got to get to it all now.
It's going to be a massacre.
He's out of time.
He's out of time. And I'm telling you, he's out of time, and it actually needs to happen. Pete says, Matt, you should watch attorney Andrew Branca go off on the radical left judges. I probably should. But we do need a counterintelligence, a specific freaking organization focused on counterintelligence here in the United States of America. All of those different accounts that are floating around online that are putting out mis and disinformation, looking at dividing America, I went over a lot of that last night, is part of the problem, part of the false information. That freaking federal judge likely looking at all of these stupid clips that are floating around the internet going, oh my God, we're out of control. Our federal officers are out of control. No. This is a serious problem. And then when you have a legitimate psyop take place, exploiting a vulnerability and weakness in the United States by members of our federal government, by people that are determining laws, making laws, sitting on Capitol Hill, absolutely, we need a counter intel threat, specifically because we've already been made aware of Russia, China, Iran conducting information campaigns here in the United States of America in order to try to affect our elections and everything else. It's a freaking problem, ladies and gentlemen. I want to thank you guys for joining me for another episode of the Speak the Truth podcast. If you haven't yet, make sure you are subscribed to the channel. Make sure you hit the like button. Make sure you share. Make sure you spread information out there. Ladies and gentlemen, I'll see you guys tonight, 9 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Peace, love, happiness. God bless. I'm out of here.
You're out of time, Mr. President.
And people want him to wait. In the blink of an eye, it's going to be, well, you can't do that because we've got the midterms.
Anyone who recommends that the regime in Venezuela be allowed to remain for 3 months or 6 months or a transition is a traitor. They're giving them time to